Hello and welcome to. Today we're going to be talking about 10 ways you know to film about girlhood and horror, covering the 10 main points you typically see in these films or just general themes. But honestly, there is just so much aspects that these films share and so many differences between them that are worth exploring. So I'll try to hit the main ones that I find particularly interesting or very relevant. Starting off strong, the exploitation of the female body. If there isn't some exploitation and excessive gore, violence, even the mutilation of the female body, you are in the wrong genre. The girlhood and horror genre thrives off of the exploitation of women's bodies, especially in sexualized ways for the male viewer, typically through violence. Of course, the woman doesn't just get the luxury of being stalked and murdered, she also has to have some other sexual use. This really ties into Linda Williams' idea of her body genres, the different ways that there's pornography, violence, and melodramas that evoke emotions in horror films. And I feel like the female body is a very specific symbol that targets both pornography and violence. For example, take Tina's death in A Nightmare on Elm Street. She got brutally murdered. It was dragged on much longer than any of the other men in that film. Freddy Krueger rips her shirt is literally ripped in the chest area, and then she's dragged on in this gory scene. Her body's tossed around, very unnecessary, excessive gore, and it happens to the woman, of course. Similar, arguably a necessary scene. This isn't as gory, but not Cassie. I'm still thinking about Euphoria. Oh my god, that's a show you could talk about. The way that Carrie gets her period in the film Carrie is also very interesting. Not even just the way she gets her period, the way that she's showering, the way she's touching herself. For someone who doesn't know much about her own body, she doesn't know about periods. She's very oblivious. We see that in the film. It's very particular. It was a very particular decision to show her showering like that, zooming in on her body. Number 2, sex equals death. If you're having sex, you're a dead man, or more likely a dead woman. This kind of ties into what we just talked about. The horror genre is obsessed with sex, shocker. Maybe don't have him take you to a horror movie on the first date. But as perfectly encapsulated by Randy and Scream, sex equals death. The final girl's qualities to take on the monster or villain typically come from her virginity, and that's what makes her survive to the end. We just talked about Tina and how she was in bed, she had just had sex with her boyfriend, and she's murdered first. In these types of films, sex is typically the punishment for the bad girl, while the good girl is, abstains from sex, any sexual activity, and is stronger and survives longer. I would say a film that most directly takes this philosophy and runs with it is the film It Follows, where the monster is literally transferred through the act of sex. We see our main character, Jay, who wouldn't have had this problem. She wouldn't have had the monster after her if she didn't engage in sexual intercourse. And even in the film, the only way to really escape your fate is to have sex with another person, but it's just shown so derived of pleasure. Number 3, it's all about performance. If femininity is the weapon, then makeup is the ammunition. The use of makeup in these films is typically to paint a mask and blend into and play on that feminine look in society. We see a lot of times in these films, though, it is used by the woman and weaponized in a way for their own personal gain. I think a great example of this is Jennifer and Jennifer's Body, especially the scene where she's smearing makeup on her face before prom. You see her rotting face, and that's supposed to be her ugly face, as ugly as Megan Fox can get. It's supposed to represent her, putting on this mask, putting on this layer before she goes and seduces her best friend's boyfriend and kills him. She ends up killing him. Another good example of this is Elaine in The Love Witch. She's a little bit more complicated because we do see her have this whole misogynistic spiel about how she wants to please men, be the perfect wife, but then there's also the fact that every single guy she tries to get with ends up dead. She has this very bold, classic old makeup. I think it's a very big part of her persona, this makeup, the way she presents herself, because she really just wants to get with these men. She wants to be the perfect wife, and we see she has this trauma that plays into it. But makeup is just another tool for her to try to get that role that she so desperately wants, or she seems to think that she wants. I definitely think that there's an element where societal pressure is controlling her, but there's also the fact that she uses it as a weapon in her own right. So let's just jump into number 4. Your BFFs will stab you in the back. Most of the times in these films, there's some sort of friendship play, there's some sort of friendship imbalance and power dynamic in the friendship. I think Jennifer's Body, like I just talked about, is a very easy example of this. There is this jealousy component. Maybe one friend has more power than the other, whether that be magical power, say wealth imbalance. They could be, I just mentioned Jennifer's Body. In the film, we do see this dynamic where Jennifer's jealous of Needy. She goes after her boyfriend. She purposely chooses Needy's boyfriend to kill, but then there's also the power dynamic of Jennifer kind of controlling things. Needy already knows her place. She can't wear certain tops because Jennifer is owns the type of top to wear. And when I say your BFFs will stab you in the back, I mean, literally, Jennifer dies because Needy stabs her in the heart. These friendships typically don't end well. I think another great example is Nancy and Sarah. Sarah has more power. She's better at witchcraft. She kind of had the power before them, and then Nancy gets this power. She feels jealous. There's also usually a guy involved, of course. See, Chris, who, had gone with Nancy in the past, now wants Sarah. Nancy feels a little bit of jealousy because of that. She ends up killing Chris. The guy always dies too, by the way, spoiler alert. And then eventually she tries to go after Sarah and kill her. Again, friendship aspect never really ends well. We've been talking about supernatural women for a bit, so it's worth asking the question, which is point number 5, is she really the villain? We see these women being villainized. What we have Carrie, Jennifer, Elaine, and Nancy too, but what is really the root cause? Like, what are they, just evil characters? Is this like a little ambiguous? And I think that it is ambiguous. You can't really define these characters as good or bad. Take Carrie. She was abused for years. She literally did not know about her period, and when she did, her mom like literally threw coffee at her face. In the books, it was even worse. She was just so abused and withdrawn as a child. She was bullied at school, where she just reached her breaking point. Obviously, you can't condone murder and murdering your whole school, and she did kill a lot of innocent people. But is she really just this villain? Can she really be characterized in just one sector? Same with Jennifer. She was literally sacrificed by a boy band for their own gain of becoming famous. These supernatural transformations are usually almost a way to regain agency. Point number 6. Red is so your color. Now we finally get into wardrobe. I think wardrobe is such a huge important part of these films. It's also a big aspect of girlhood. And I wanted to talk particularly about the colors of white and red in wardrobe. We know white to symbolize purity, innocence, where red can almost represent, lack of innocence, sexuality, but also like blood. But there's also the aspect of red being associated with boldness, being strong, and these different types of colors can be used in different ways. I think a great example is a picnic at Hanging Rock. We see in the beginning these girls wearing white, they're schoolgirls, they have a lot of innocence, and then they go missing at the rock. The one girl who comes back, we see her in a red cloak later, signaling transformation. Maybe lack of innocence, maybe lack of purity. Of course, the film is very ambiguous, so you never really know exactly, but wardrobe is used for transformation. And again, with blood in Jennifer's body, we see their prom dresses covered in blood. Carrie gets covered in blood at the end of the film in her very light, almost white color dress. So, the blood red color plays into the horror genre, but it also just represents these different changes. And also, honestly, maybe a little bit of a subversion to the male gaze, because Jennifer and Carrie, they're not looking their best, most attractive selves soaked in blood, and they both look a little bit scary in those scenes as well, right? Number 7, the curation of aesthetics for horror. The aesthetic of a film can play a really big role in, generating the atmosphere, the whole vibe of the film, the way that the horror is presented in the film. Again, a great example, Picnic at Hanging Rock. There is this whole atmosphere, while the plot is not, gory and there's not a lot of violence going on. Horror is conveyed from the ambiguity, the silence, the ominous flute noises, the rock stillness, the way that the camera has there's almost like an orange tint or this very warm tint on the whole film that just gives it this very almost like a hallucination, dreamlike feeling. And we see this with A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night as well. The whole film is in black and white. That's a very strong stylistic choice. And there's also just a lot of silence in the film. The way the noise plays, it conveys that horror aspect. Again, there's not a whole lot of super gory stuff happening, but the horror is conveyed through the atmosphere, the ominous feeling, and these empty shots. And number 8, maybe your parents are right about skipping that party. Parties don't tend to go too well in the girlhood and horror film genre. You have, of course, your prom nights. We've talked about this quite a bit, but there's also just your regular high school party, and people tend to die. Prom, Carrie's whole school is killed. Jennifer's body, Chip is killed. The craft, Chris is killed at the party. These just tend to be places of death. And while this isn't a film we watched in class, I've been watching The Vampire Diaries recently, and even things tend to go wrong when there's a party happening in the middle of the woods. Number 9, the supernatural monster. We talked about the woman as a villain, or the supernatural woman, but some of these films have the supernatural monster. There's It and It Follows. There's Freddy Krueger. These tend to have this indestructible aspect. We see Freddy Krueger still being alive at the end, even after this false sense of reassurance that Nancy defeated him in A Nightmare on Elm Street. And, It and It Follows, the monster still present at the end, slowly trailing after them. There's also the fact that teenagers are targeted in all of these. The way that the monster in It kills people is very linked to sex. And then we also see Freddy Krueger, he was originally supposed to be a pedophile. While it's not directly mentioned in the script, there's a lot of indications that he is a pedophile in the way that he targets the children. He targets them in their dreams. I think a pretty big example of this is the bathtub scene where Nancy's in the bathtub and Freddy's hand comes out between her legs. But this is just your typical run-of-the-mill, if you think of horror, you usually think of like this killer and monster. Last but not least, number 10 is the Mean Girls. A lot of these films have this high school setting, so of course you're gonna have that stereotypical popular girl. We have Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Immediately in the first episode, she gets approached by the popular mean girl of the school. It's identified, it's there. That's a pretty big element. And the fact that the popular girls usually have some sort of like role in driving almost the main characters into doing things. We see Laura Lizzie bullying Rochelle in the craft, and what happens to her? Her hair starts falling out. So typically, the popular girls don't have the best fate in horror movies, but they do play a role in one serving as like, that typical stereotype, but also in usually pushing the characters into doing something and helping establish that high school setting. Those were my 10 points and my 10 ways you know it's a film about girlhood and horror. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you.